Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Dr. Nathaniel Reyes stood at the mouth of the bunker, gazing out at the scorched remains of the once verdant valley below. The wind whipped up clouds of dust and ash, remnants of the relentless war that had left this remote planet, Vendros 9, in ruins. In the distance, he could hear the faint tremble of artillery fire, a grim reminder that the fighting was far from over. Yet, here in his underground emergency station, tucked away beneath the remnants of a collapsed mine, he had carved out a fragile sanctuary. Reyes wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and turned to step inside, where the cool, stale air of the bunker greeted him. The dim light cast long shadows across the makeshift beds lined with wounded soldiers. Some were unconscious, their bodies hooked up to rudimentary foredrips. Others groaned in pain, the result of hastily patched up wounds that Reyes knew would only worsen without proper treatment. But proper treatment was a luxury he no longer had. Medical supplies were running low, and the flow of injured soldiers both from his own faction and the enemy was relentless. He couldn't turn them away, not when their lives were hanging by a thread. Regardless of the insignia they wore on their uniforms, this was the vow he had made when he first became a doctor, and it was the one thing he clung to as the world around him collapsed. "Dr. Reyes," came a voice from behind. He turned to see Sergeant Marco Ashford, his second in command, standing in the doorway. Ashford's uniform was stained with blood, though Reyes wasn't sure if it was his or someone else's. "We've got another one." Reyes sighed and motioned for Ashford to bring the patient inside. They had set up a crew triage system in the far corner of the bunker, and as Ashford carefully lowered the stretcher onto the ground, Reyes quickly assessed the injuries. The soldier was barely conscious, his face pale and slick with sweat. A jagged wound ran across his torso, deep enough to expose muscle and bone. "Enemy or ours?" Reyes asked, though it didn't really matter. "Does it make a difference?" Ashford muttered, but he answered anyway. "Enemy, Lieutenant, I think." Reyes knelt beside the soldier and peeled back the blood-soaked fabric of his uniform. The insignia of the opposing faction, a black eagle on a red background, was unmistakable. The man's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and Reyes could see the fear in them. "Help me," the lieutenant whispered, his voice barely audible. "I will," Reyes replied, more to himself than to the soldier. "I will." Hours later, the bunker was silent except for the steady beeping of the few functioning monitors and the soft hum of the makeshift generator. Reyes stood over the operating table, his hands slick with blood, his shoulders aching from the tension of the long surgery. The enemy Lieutenant Kiravos, as Ashford had learned from the man's dog tag, was still unconscious, but stable. For now, at least. Reyes peeled off his gloves and tossed them into a bin, then collapsed onto a nearby stool. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on him, but he knew there was no time for rest. There were still more wounded to tend to, and his staff was stretched thin. Ashford approached, his face a mask of disapproval. "We're not going to be able to keep this up," he said, crossing his arms. "You keep treating enemy soldiers like this, and word's going to get out. It's only a matter of time before both sides decide we're more trouble than we're worth." Reyes sighed, rubbing his temples. "You think I don't know that? But I can't just let them die, Marco. I'm a doctor, not a soldier. And what happens when the governor gets wind of this? Or worse, when the enemy commander finds out? We're sitting ducks here, and you're giving them all the ammunition they need to wipe us off the map." Reyes stood, feeling a spark of anger flare in his chest. "I didn't ask for this war. I didn't ask to be stuck in the middle of it, but I'll be damned if I'm going to let politics dictate who lives and who dies. Not here. Not in this station." Ashford shook his head, frustration evident in his posture. "You can't save everyone, Doc. Sometimes you've got to make choices, and right now, you're making the wrong ones." Before Reyes could respond, the door to the bunker swung open, and a gust of hot air rushed in. Standing in the doorway was a woman in a crisp military uniform, her expression as cold and unforgiving as the war-torn landscape outside. "Governor Eleanor Tanis." "Dr. Reyes," she said, her voice sharp and authoritative. "We need to talk." The makeshift office where Reyes and Governor Tanis met was little more than a converted storage room, with a battered desk and a few chairs scavenged from the ruins above. The air was thick with tension as the governor took a seat across from him, her piercing gaze never wavering. "I've been hearing rumors, Doctor," she began, folding her hands neatly on the table. "Rumors that you've been treating enemy combatants in this facility of yours. Is there any truth to these allegations?" Reyes leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "I treat anyone who comes through those doors, Governor. I don't ask for their allegiance, just their injuries." Tanis' lips curled into a thin smile. "Noble, perhaps, but misguided. You're aware that this war is about more than just territory, aren't you? It's about survival, our survival, and every enemy soldier you save is one more blade poised against our throats." "I'm a doctor," Reyes replied, his voice steady. "My duty is to save lives, not to decide which ones are worth saving." Tanis tilted her head, studying him as if he were a particularly interesting puzzle. "And how long do you think you'll be able to maintain this neutrality? How long before the enemy decides that your little sanctuary here is a threat to their war effort? How long before they send someone to burn it to the ground?" Reyes swallowed hard. He had asked himself the same questions countless times. The answer was always the same: not long. "I'm not naive, Governor," he said. "I know the risks. But I won't turn away the dying just because they wear a different uniform." For a moment, Tanis was silent, her gaze never leaving his. Then she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I can help you, Doctor. I can ensure that your station receives the supplies it needs. I can protect you from both sides of this conflict. But I need something in return." Reyes felt a chill creep up his spine. "What do you want?" "I want you to prioritize our soldiers," Tanis said, her smile returning. "I want you to ensure that our high-ranking officials receive the care they need, even if that means letting a few enemy combatants slip away. In exchange, you'll have the resources to keep this station running. You'll be able to save more lives, our lives." Reyes stared at her, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a vice. It was tempting, he couldn't deny that. With the supplies Governor Tanis was offering, he could save more people, provide better care. But at what cost? Could he live with himself if he started choosing who lived and who died based on their rank and their allegiance? "I can't do that," Reyes said finally, his voice low but firm. "I won't." Tanis' expression hardened. "Then you're sealing your own fate, Doctor, and the fate of everyone in this station." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I hope you're prepared for the consequences of your choices." That night, Reyes couldn't sleep. He lay on his narrow cot, staring up at the ceiling, the governor's words echoing in his mind. He had known from the start that setting up this emergency station was a gamble, but now it felt like the walls were closing in on him. Supplies were running out, the wounded kept coming, and the pressure from both sides was becoming unbearable. His mind wandered to Lieutenant Kira Voss, who was still unconscious in the medical bay. She had been stable after the surgery, but her recovery was far from guaranteed. He had saved her life, at least for now, but what would happen if she woke up? Would she be grateful? Or would she see him as just another enemy, prolonging her suffering in the name of some misguided sense of duty? Reyes rolled onto his side, his heart heavy. He had spent years batching up soldiers, sending them back out into the meat grinder of war, only for them to return, broken and battered, again and again. At some point, it had to stop. At some point, someone had to draw the line. But where? The next morning, Reyes was jolted awake by the sound of gunfire outside the bunker. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding as he grabbed his medical bag and rushed toward the entrance. Ashford was already there, his rifle slung over his shoulder as he peered through a narrow slit in the bunker's entrance. "We've got trouble," Ashford said, his voice, Tight. Looks like one of the enemy patrols is getting a little too close for comfort. Ray's stomach twisted into knots. How many? A dozen? Maybe more, Ashford replied, stepping back from the slit. They're searching the area, probably looking for us. Ray cursed under his breath. This was exactly what he had feared. If the enemy found the station, it was all over. They wouldn't care that he had saved one of their own. They would see the bunker as a threat, and they would destroy it. We need to evacuate the wounded, Ray said, his mind racing. Get them out before the patrol finds us. There's no time, Ashford replied, his eyes narrowing. If they find us moving out, they'll gun us down before we get 10 feet. Ray clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be. Before he could speak, a soft groan came from behind him. He turned to see Lieutenant Kira Voss stirring on her bed, her eyes fluttering open. She looked disoriented, confused, but alive. Ray hurried to her side, his hands gentle as he checked her vitals. "You're awake?" he said, relief flooding his voice. Voss blinked up at him, her brow furrowed. "Where am I?" "You're in an emergency station," Ray explained, keeping his voice calm. "I'm Dr. Ray. I operated on you after you were injured." She stared at him for a long moment, her gaze sharp and suspicious. "Why would you save me?" Ray met her eyes, his voice steady. "Because it's my job." Voss's eyes, a striking gray, narrowed as she tried to comprehend her situation. "You're from the other side," she said, her voice hoarse, yet sharp with accusation. "Why would you treat me?" Ray wasn't fazed. He'd had this conversation too many times to be unsettled by the hostility. "Because it doesn't matter what side you're on in here. It only matters if you're alive, and I make sure that happens." She tried to sit up, but a grimace of pain crossed her face, and she sank back down onto the bed. "And what now? You keep me prisoner?" Ray frowned and glanced toward Ashford, who was still watching the entrance like a hawk. The danger was too real, too immediate to waste time explaining the complexities of their situation. "No one's keeping you prisoner. You're free to go once you're able, but right now, you need rest, and we need to figure out how to get out of here alive." Ashford gave a sharp nod. "Patrol's getting closer, Doc." "We don't have much time." Voss's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but there was a flicker of understanding in her gaze. She was an officer, a fighter, and she knew when survival outweighed personal grievances. Ray leaned down, his voice low but firm. "If they find us, they'll kill us all, including you. So you can help, or you can stay out of the way. Either way, we need to be ready to move, fast." Voss studied him for a moment before nodding, her face hardening. "What do you need me to do?" Before Ray could respond, the unmistakable crack of gunfire echoed from outside, louder and closer than before. Ashford swore under his breath, tightening his grip on his rifle. "They've found us." "We're out of time." Ray moved quickly to the wounded, giving sharp orders to his staff to prepare for an immediate evacuation. Voss, still pale but determined, forced herself up with a wince of pain. Her strength was nowhere near what it needed to be, but there was a fire in her eyes that couldn't be extinguished so easily. "Get ready to move," Ray called out, already calculating their chances. They had to relocate deeper into the maze of tunnels beneath the bunker, hoping to lose the patrol in the confusion of collapsed mine shafts and forgotten passages. The problem was that they were still moving critical patients, and every second they delayed gave the enemy more time to close in. The tension thickened as the sounds of boots stomping on the barren ground above reverberated through the walls. They were close, too close. Voss gritted her teeth and grabbed a weapon from one of the nearby supply crates. "I'll cover the rear. You get them out of here, Ray." Ray looked at her, momentarily surprised by the offer. "You can barely stand," he said. But Voss shook her head. "I can still shoot. And if I can buy us time, I'll do it." Ashford gave her a skeptical glance but didn't argue. He knew just as well as Ray that they needed every possible advantage they could get right now. The group started moving, Ray's helping a badly wounded soldier who could barely walk, while the others carried supplies and patients down the tunnels. The low, oppressive atmosphere of the underground passages made every breath feel heavy, but they pressed forward, deeper into the darkness. Shots rang out behind them, loud and chaotic. Voss had opened fire, and for a brief moment, Ray's felt a flicker of hope. If they could hold them off long enough, maybe they had a chance. But hope was a fragile thing in times of war, and it shattered quickly. An explosion rocked the tunnel, sending a shower of dust and debris down from the ceiling. The sound of it reverberated through the narrow passage, deafening in its intensity. Ray's instinctively threw himself over the wounded soldier to shield him, as the ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. "They're using explosives," Ashford shouted over the noise, panic creeping into his usually steady voice. "They're going to bring the whole damn tunnel down." Ray's looked back through the haze of dust. Voss was still at the entrance, firing with grim determination, but the enemy was advancing too fast. They had no choice but to retreat further into the collapsing network of tunnels. "Move!" Ray's yelled, his voice hoarse. He grabbed the nearest patient and pulled them deeper into the dark. Ashford and the rest of the staff followed, their faces set with grim determination. They couldn't hold out here any longer. The sounds of gunfire were deafening, ricocheting off the walls as Voss continued to shoot, even as debris fell around her. She stumbled, her body weakening, but she didn't stop. Ray's felt a pang of guilt, knowing she was buying them time at the cost of her own life. He wanted to go back, to pull her out, but he knew it would be suicide to turn around now. They had to keep going. He had to trust she could take care of herself. But then, another explosion rocked the tunnel, this one closer. Too close. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, and suddenly, the ceiling began to cave in. "No!" Ray's yelled, instinctively grabbing the nearest person and pulling them back. The tunnel ahead of them collapsed with a deafening roar, cutting off their escape route. Ashford swore loudly, staring at the rubble in disbelief. "We're trapped." Ray's heart pounded in his chest as he assessed their situation. The tunnel had caved in, blocking their path forward, and the enemy was still closing in from behind. They were out of options. Voss stumbled toward them, covered in dust and blood, but alive. She was limping badly, her breathing labored, but there was a fierce determination in her eyes that hadn't faded. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice ragged but strong. "There's another way out." Ray stared at her, hope flickering again. "Where?" Voss gestured toward the side of the tunnel, where a narrow, nearly invisible passageway led deeper into the mine. "It's risky, but it'll get us out of here if we move fast." Ashford hesitated, clearly doubtful, but Ray's didn't need convincing. They had no choice. "Let's go," he ordered, helping Voss to her feet. They moved quickly, the group of survivors following Voss as she led them through the dark, winding passage. The air was thick with dust, and the walls felt as though they might close in at any moment, but they pressed on, driven by the desperation to survive. Behind them, the sounds of the enemy grew fainter, drowned out by the groaning of the unstable tunnel. But Rays knew they weren't safe yet. Not by a long shot. As they emerged from the passage, the dim light of dawn filtered in through a narrow crevice ahead. The air was fresher here, less suffocating, but the tension hadn't lifted. The war was still raging outside, and they were still deep in enemy territory. Rays stepped out first, scanning the area. The horizon was painted with the fiery glow of distant battles, but for the moment, they were alone. "We made it," Ashford said, his voice laced with disbelief. But Rays couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. They had escaped the immediate danger, but the war wasn't over, and neither was their fight for survival. Voss, still leaning heavily on Rays, looked up at the sky, her face pale but resolute. "This war won't end with one victory or one escape. But we can still save lives, Rays." Rays nodded, his jaw set. "We'll find a way." Somehow, as the sun rose over the war-torn landscape, casting long shadows over the ruins, Rays knew that their journey wasn't over. There would be more battles, more lives to save, and more impossible choices to make. But for now, they had survived. And as long as they could keep moving, as long as they could keep fighting, there was still hope.